Did you pee on Dave Chappelle's lawn? Because somebody did. Oh my goodness, so much Dave Chappelle. I'll do that all in the second half. You probably heard William Shatner went to space. Some people are questioning whether or not it counts. It only resulted in 4 minutes of weightlessness, which Jimmy Kimmel said, calling them astronauts is like claiming you lost your virginity because you found a Playboy in the woods. It doesn't count. Back on Earth, Shatner spoke to Jeff Bezos. While they were speaking, Bezos' girlfriend Lauren interrupted them, saying, "Give me a champagne bottle." Jimmy Kimmel said, "I think this is what you act like when you have $200 billion. Poor William Shatner. First, no green women in bikinis try to have sex with him in space. Then he gets iced, blown off by Jeff Bezos. The whole thing was very over the top. It felt less like a rocket launch and more like a North Korean news broadcast." Trevor Noah said, "If you ask me, 90 is actually the best age to go to space because what's the worst that could happen? You die? So what? At 90, dying in a rocket is basically best case scenario." From CNN, podcast mogul Joe Rogan said he isn't anti-vaccine and that he attempted to receive the COVID-19 vax in Las Vegas several months ago, but missed the appointment due to scheduling conflicts. Yeah? Okay. Rogan, who tested positive for COVID-19 last month, had downplayed the need for mass vaccines, right, CNN? He had CNN chief medical correspondent Dr. Sanjay Gupta on his podcast. Why not? They discussed the coronavirus and vaccines. Rogan said, based on his experience of getting COVID-19 and recovering in a healthy fashion, the method of a person carrying antibodies doesn't have to be mutually exclusive for natural immunity or via the vaccine, or it could be both. Rogan said, "It would be better to get the virus and recover and have amazing immunity. You know what I think you should do? I think you should get vaccinated and then get sick." Rogan said, and I'm reading this verbatim from the CNN article, so pardon my grammar or someone's grammar. "This is why, because then you get the vaccine protects you from a bad infection. And then you get COVID, so then you get the robust immunity that's imparted from having the actual disease itself." Someone's going to have to translate that for me. Gupta pushed back at Rogan and said, "It's not a strategy to recommend people get infected." I'm going to agree with that. I'm not a medical doctor, but if I have to pick sides, I'm going with that. Rogan told Gupta that was never his intent, but more so to honor multiple sides of the equation. Rogan criticized CNN as dangerous for taking his COVID-19 treatment regimen out of context and lying about me taking horse medication. Gupta wrote on a column on CNN.com, "I guess a small part of me thought I might change Joe Rogan's mind about vaccines. After this last exchange, I realized it was probably futile. His mind was made up, and there would always be plenty of misinformation out there, neatly packaged to support his convictions." Meanwhile, from Fox News, they recapped The View with this headline: "The View hosts clash over Joe Rogan. He's transphobic, he's Islamophobic, he's said racist things." Co-host Sunny Hostin said of Sanjay Gupta's vaccine debate with Rogan, "I don't think you can make sense of crazy. I have zero interest." Co-host Troy Behar and Sunny Hostin slammed Rogan, agreeing they would not be making attempts to reach out to his vast audience because of his refusal to take the coronavirus vaccine, as well as some of his past remarks, while co-hosts Sherry Shepard, Anna Navarro, and Sarah Haynes agreed it was beneficial for listeners to hear the two discuss the topic. Behar said sarcastically, "Yeah, let's listen to a radio talk show host instead of a scientist and a doctor." Clearly, Gupta did not change Joe Rogan's mind. Navarro praised Gupta and Rogan for having the conversation, noted that because Rogan had millions of listeners, even just a few people changing their minds to take the vaccine would be significant. Behar said, "He's so arrogant," but then Sherry Shepard chimed in saying she knew Rogan as a very smart man and thought it was great the two had a respectful discourse on the subject. Hostin said, "Sanjay said he went there to understand his thinking. I'm not so interested in understanding the Trump mind. I'm not so interested in understanding the anti-vax mind because I'm not interested in understanding crazy. I don't think you can make any sense of crazy. I have zero interest." Behar read a quote from Howard Stern. Time out. I started a podcast called Daily Comedy News. I thought I was going to come on here and tell you like Hannibal Buress is going on tour, Jim Gaffigan's got a new special. And now we're in the weeds in this, and we haven't even gotten to Dave Chappelle today. What is going on in comedy? Behar read a quote from Howard Stern, criticizing Rogan for choosing not to take the vaccine. Shepard then said, "But I don't think by saying you're an idiot is going to change a person's mind." Hostin said Gupta couldn't convince the host. "You're not going to change a mind. You're not going to change Joe's mind, but out of 200 million listening there might be a mind change on Sanjay, respected Joe enough to actually go on there." Haynes, I think it was so important to go on there, not to convince Joe Rogan and not to have the intention of convincing anyone else. Provide the facts, answer with science, let people make up their own minds. That's the problem in this day and age. We're telling people how to feel. They will feel what they want. Give them enough information, and then they will make that decision and win on merit. I don't think she screamed it the way I did, but that's my artistic interpretation of this conversation. Hostin now jumping in. Yes, he has all these listeners. That's so wonderful. Again, she may not have said it in this particular style, but some of the stuff he has said, he's transphobic, he's Islamophobic, he said racist things, and these people continue to listen to him. I think if you are still listening to him, knowing his history, I'm not interested in reaching out to you. A lot of talk on this show, apparently. Shepard now says, you're going to change my mind when you have respectful discourse, because I want to make my own decisions. There are people that are still listening to the show that are wavering because Sanjay went on there and said things about the mask and the pricking of fingers. They might go, oh, if I can change one heart, another heart can change another heart. And Haynes said, amen. Oh man, this next one, I've been waiting to tell you about this one. Is Johnny Mac right in the end? Listen to this from Variety. The Grammys have decided that Bo Burnham's Inside the Songs is not eligible as a contender in the comedy album category for the 2022 Grammys. The album will still be on the ballot, but in the category of Best Compilation Soundtrack for Visual Media. Let me read that phrase again. Soundtrack for Visual Media. This will be important in a second. Longtime listeners know where I'm heading. Soundtrack for Visual Media instead of comedy album. The album is made up of musical material that appeared in Burnham's hit Netflix special, Inside. Variety writes, since Burnham's album went to #1 on the comedy chart and has remained in that top spot for 18 weeks, it's not known what the Academy Comedy Screening Committee's rationale for disqualifying it is, but then they theorize. The fact that it consists of material recorded for TV instead of an audio medium might be seen as a factor in bumping to soundtrack contention, if not for the fact that last year's winner, Tiffany Haddish's Black Mitzvah, was also the soundtrack to a Netflix special. Johnny Mac Army raising up. We're all like, yes, Johnny Mac has been saying this. Catch everybody up. I know a comedy album when I see one. I know a comedy album when I hear one. I know what a Netflix special is. And the last few years, the Best Comedy Album Award has been going to the audio for Netflix specials. Let me jump back into the article. Last year's winner, Tiffany Haddish's Black Mitzvah, was also the soundtrack to a Netflix special, as were the other contenders like Jerry Seinfeld's 23 Hours to Kill, not a comedy album, a comedy special, a great comedy special, but that's not an album, and Bill Burr's Paper Tiger, same thing. Not a comedy album. In fact, writes Variety, most of the albums nominated for comedy in recent years have been soundtracks to TV or streaming specials. The decision could reflect a desire to keep the category to spoken word stand-up and disallow satirical music. That explanation doesn't track either. Looking at past winners, there's a history of nominated musical material dating back to the Chipmunks and Stan Freberg getting nods for comedy as far back as 1959, and as recent as Weird Al's Mandatory Fun winning Best Comedy Album as recently as 2015. Similarly, Flight of the Conchords' The Distant Future won in 2007. Again, for me, Weird Al doing a comedy album, it's a comedy album. Flight of the Conchords doing a comedy album? It's a comedy album. Jerry Seinfeld doing a Netflix special and somebody ripping the audio? It's a Netflix special. Today's Daily Comedy News is brought to you by the Behind the Bits podcast. On Behind the Bits, Scott Curtis learns everything he can about stand-up comedy from his guests. He's had the greats like Tom Dreesen, as well as new sensations like Corey Ryan Forrester. So Scott might ask somebody, were you inspired by Dave Chappelle or George Carlin? Maybe skip the Dave Chappelle question this particular week. Paula Padstone or Eliza Schlesinger. How do you write your comedy sets? Which jokes work? Which ones failed? How did you find your comedic voice? Scott hits these topics every week. Behind the Bits won the Discover Pod's annual award for Best Interview Style Podcast. I've never won any awards. I am jealous here. You can follow Behind the Bits on Twitch to watch the interviews live and unedited. That's at twitch.tv/behindthebits. David Britton's the guest on the most recent episode talking about his album, The History of the Universe. And some 5-star reviews on Apple Podcasts. Listen to this one. Scott is doing a great job putting a lot of effort in his podcast, a must-listen-to podcast for comics or people just interested in comedy, which I'm going to guess is you because you're about 10 minutes into my nonsense. Great guests and interviews. 5 stars. You guys got to step up the review game for this podcast, by the way. It's the Behind the Bits podcast, wherever you get your shows. They sponsor today's Daily Comedy News. So at the beginning of this podcast, I asked, did you pee on Dave Chappelle's lawn? I want to go into half-ass Foxworthy for some reason. If you peed on Dave Chappelle's lawn, From WHIO, 2 men admitted to being on Dave Chappelle's property early this week and urinating on the comedian's property. Now, look, no matter how you feel about a Netflix special, don't pee on somebody's lawn. Here at Daily Comedy News, we do not approve of such behavior at all. 2 men, an 18-year-old and a 28-year-old, were cited with criminal mischief. The judge ordered them to write a letter to Chappelle. Oh my goodness, can we please get a copy of this letter? They were also put on probation for 2 years and each had to pay a $100 fine. So the probation is what? Don't pee on lawns for 2 years? Deputies first responded to Dave Chappelle's home around 5 p.m. a week ago Sunday after receiving a report of 3 men trying to crawl under the gate of the property. Wonder what happened to the third guy. A neighbor told deputies when he asked about the men what they were doing, 2 of the male subjects began to urinate on Dave Chappelle's front gate. Surveillance video footage led the officers to a home where the 3 believed to be involved were spotted. A deputy, this is so funny, a deputy asked one of the men, "Why were you over at Dave Chappelle's house today? What was the purpose of going to his property?" A woman who was at the property, who's not facing charges, told the deputies what happened. The woman said in body camera video obtained by News Center 7, the woman said, "They just had a pee and they jumped out. They were like, oh, this is it? It was stupid." Both were summoned into court and admitted to the charges they were cited for. The third man, who was not charged, said he was with the other 2, but he did not urinate on the gate. Whew. Hannah Gadsby is not happy with Netflix. From Variety, Australian comedian Hannah Gadsby has spoken out strongly against Netflix co-CEO Ted Sarandos. Again, I don't understand this co-CEO thing. You're either in charge or you're not. Somebody's in charge. We're not flipping a coin if the 2 co-CEOs disagree, right? Someone's in charge. Anyway, she's mad at Ted after being referenced in his memo defending Dave Chappelle. In that memo, it said adults can watch violence, assault, and abuse or enjoy shocking stand-up comedy without it causing them to harm others. We're working hard to ensure marginalized communities aren't defined by a single story. So we have Sex Education, Orange is the New Black, Control Z, Hannah Gadsby, and Dave Chappelle all on Netflix. Key to this is increasing diversity on the content team itself. Gadsby posted on Instagram on Friday, "Hey, Ted Sarandos, just a quick note to let you know that I would prefer if you didn't drag my name into your mess. Now I have to deal with even more of the hate and anger that Dave Chappelle's fans like to unleash on me every time Dave gets $20 million to process his emotionally stunted partial worldview. You didn't pay me nearly enough to deal with the real-world consequences of the hate speech dog whistling you refuse to acknowledge. Ted, F you and your amoral algorithm cults. I do craps with more backbone than you." That's just a joke. I definitely didn't cross a line because there isn't one. Holy cow, I just checked the clock. This podcast is getting long. I got more stuff. Here's a teaser for tomorrow. Stevie Wonder wasn't the weirdest part. Yeah, there's more Chappelle tomorrow. That's your comedy news for today. Follow the show, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts. Chime in. Facebook group, Daily Comedy News Podcast. Chime in. Instagram at Daily Comedy News. Whew, I can't believe we're in week 3 of talking about Dave Chappelle. See you tomorrow.